Hello and welcome to the flight deck of the Mighty Dash. And if you look out the windshield here, you'll notice something about the sky here in the San Francisco Bay Area. It is unusually clear. There is not a cloud in the sky. Our altimeter is at 2992 standard and we have no winds. Basically what I've done is I've cleared the decks here weather-wise because we're really not taking a trip anywhere. We don't have anything planned that has anything at all to do with the weather and has a lot to do with, instead, physics and aerodynamics. What we are going to do is we are going to do a short little course in unusual attitude recovery, or upset recovery, or any other number of synonyms for it. And before we really get going in earnest, I just want to preface it by saying that I do not have the prerequisite seat time in a real dash, nor access to the training materials for the real dash to know exactly how true to life this is. I am at very best a low-hour would-be student pilot. I've got about 20-25 hours of flying in my entire life, although I'm probably going to go for my PPL in the springtime, time and budget and weather permitting. So bear in mind, I don't know as much as I need to know about real life piloting, and I know even less about commercial piloting, but for this I owe a debt to whoever posted on YouTube a whole series of American Airlines training videos from the early to mid 90s, which came after they had a string of bad and avoidable accidents, and they decided to go all out in training pilots basically to be better pilots, to be better at the basics of flying an airplane and not just being system managers or button pushers. And I think just about every major airline in the United States and many airlines around the world have done something similar, because a shocking number of air accidents come from loss of control. I think that's the biggest cause of airline accidents to this day, although I'm not certain now that planes are being shot out of the sky. But if you look at Colgan Continental 3407, which of course was a Dash 8 Q400, or Air France 447, or the recent Air Asia flight, there is a whole spate of seemingly avoidable deadly accidents if only the pilots had done a better job flying the plane. So that's why we're doing this. And I've gleaned a lot of my information from this American Airlines online course, and also from my readings, and also from my limited amount of time up in a glider with my brother and friends of my brother's, and conversations with a buddy of mine who is both a a private pilot and a airline captain as well. Bear in mind that the specific videos that I was looking at, the smallest plane they refer to is a Fokker F-28-100, or an F-100, I think it is more accurately. So what would be equivalent to something like an Embraer or a Bombardier regional jet. A little bit bigger than that, but not much. Where I'm fairly confident in passing this info on is in the sense that whether it's a 737 or an MD-11 or a 777 or the Mighty Dash, these planes are far, far different from anything you've encountered if you have been flying, either simulated or in the real world, in a small plane. And let's get some of the differences out of the way before we go any further. Most small planes, Cessnas, Pipers, Beechcraft, Cirruses that you'll be flying today, Diamonds, Lancers, have an engine with a considerable amount of weight and in the front, forward of the wings. They also are small, they are short, and they are, relatively speaking, except maybe for the Lancer and to some degree the Cirrus, they use fairly lightly loaded wings. In that, I mean they use wings that have a lot of surface area compared to the amount of weight they're asked to lift. So even if the engine isn't unbelievably powerful, it's a piston engine, it has no lag, it goes when you say go. The plane has got wings that want to fly and aren't just built for very low drag, and therefore very forgiving. And they're forgiving with of a wide range of angles of attack of flight. And you've got a lightweight fuselage, a lightweight airframe that has very little in the way of momentum. Now, contrast that, if you will, with, just say, the Mighty Dash. What we've got here is, instead of an engine up front, which would bring the nose down at a high angle of attack if you merely let go, we've got two engines here. We've got a long fuselage, which means that it has a very high polar moment. I'm sorry, it doesn't have a high polar moment. It has a large amount of, I guess you'd call it rotational leverage. In other words, something pushing here will be inclined to tip the plane up or down, whereas in a small plane, which is, everything is closely coupled, you don't have that. What you have here is the phenomenon of applying power here, having it lever the entire plane back towards the wheels and the nose up. And you also do not have the kind of elevator authority that either a fighter plane or many small planes will have. So you run the possibility of getting yourself in too high a nose-up attitude and not having the authority to get yourself back over with enough energy, or become inverted and not have enough authority to stay inverted at -1g, which would be what it would take to keep you from falling to the earth nose first upside down. So the physics of this plane, you also have very, very narrow, knife-like, highly loaded wings, which means they only operate comfortably in a narrow range of angles of attack, and a whole bunch of other factors. But basically what it means is that the upset behavior and the recovery behavior are going to be different, and you'll see why in a second. What we'll do is I'm going to show you how to diagnose the problem and how reasonably to get out of it. There are some limitations other than my own lack of knowledge, and those are the limitations of simulation itself. When we get into a situation in this plane, as good as the flight dynamics are, it is possible we are going to get outside the realm of what it's capable of simulating, and it'll do something, if not random, it'll do something that the real plane will not do, and there's really not much we can do about that, and you'll see that in several instances. But what we're going to do is we're going to get up to 9,000 feet, which will give us some cushion. We will take off, actually we'll take off and turn around back behind us, and we'll take off doing a left-hand climbing turn, which is an Immelman, which is going to put us in a 180-degree climbing turn, and will put us very close to our maximum angle of attack and our maximum, our minimum speed. Now, speaking of speed, you know, you look right here, and there's our V1, VR, V2, V-fry, V-climb, and you will also see a barber pole with a red bottom on it and a red top. And you will naturally take it to mean, especially in the bottom end, that this plane has a stalling speed. The fact is, and excuse me if I'm overstating it or oversimplifying it, but no airfoil really, strictly speaking, has a stalling speed. Instead, what it has is a maximum alpha. Now, alpha, when you're sitting on the ground, is the angle of attack. In other words, it is the number of degrees above the horizon or below the horizon that your airfoil is pointed. But in reality, it's more complicated than that. It has, alpha really is the difference between the angle that this wing is pointed and the vector that the plane is flying. Now you can see it's pointed about 2 degrees nose down just at rest. And on a descent it may be 5 degrees nose down. On the other hand, you have witnessed times when the airplane is descending and yet the nose is pointed up a few degrees, and that really is the alpha. It's the difference between the line, if you can draw it. See, right now, if you can, let's just draw a line off of this wing, which is horizontal, and you draw it out to here, and you notice there's a little bit of an angular difference between here and there. And as this plane flies around normally in level flight, not climbing or descending, it will be very slightly nose down. So even though it is going through the air level, it is going through the air pitched down ever so slightly, or pitched up ever so slightly. And if you draw that line, right now, its flight path vector, if it kept flying at this attitude, would be there. And its alpha would be the difference between there and here, and that would be about a negative 2 degrees in normal level flight, not climbing or descending. So bear that in mind, because you've all seen it when you see a large airliner coming to land. It's at a very low speed. It is descending. Its flight path vector is downward, but its lift vector is still pointing up, and its angle of attack of the wing is pointing up with respect to that descending vector. So it has a positive alpha. Now imagine if instead of descending at that same power setting, you wanted to keep the plane in level flight. Well, you would have to crank up that alpha. And of course, at some point, the wing would quit producing lift. The air would become separated from it, and first you would get buffeting, and then you would possibly lose your controls as the airflow became turbulent where the controls should be moving it around. And then the whole thing would lose lift and you would sink down this way. And in this plane, you will sink on this vector. Now, the reason why alpha is referenced to the flight path vector is because you can do exactly the same thing with the airplane inverted. The airplane doesn't care. The airfoil doesn't care. It does to some extent, in that it's not perfectly symmetrical, but for all intents and purposes, it doesn't care very much. The other thing to be aware of is if, say, you're coming up a big climb and your angle of attack is high and your alpha is high and your airspeed is slowing down, and then you come up over top of that arc and you get down to 0 G's or negative G's, your nose will start to point back down, your alpha will decrease, and even though you're barely going 50, 60, 70, 80 knots, well below your stalling speed, if there were such a thing, you're not going to stall, and you're going to have control of you're going to have control from your surfaces. So that is going to be a big clue to how we get out of some of these messes we're going to get into, and it's also a very telling clue to why some pilots, commercial, private, otherwise, continue to smack planes into the ground, is because they mistakenly think they're looking for a number, or there is a recipe in that sense, when in fact they have alternatives available to them as long as they know a little something about the aerodynamics and the physics of the thing. So we're going to climb out of here, and we're going to do an Immelman to get out, and we're going to get it almost to the edge of stick shaker, climb as fast as we possibly can in reverse course. And we're going to do it over terrain. This is really inadvisable, but, you know, once we want to get upstairs efficiently, and besides, we want to do something that will put us very close to our performance limits, just so you can see what it looks like. So with that, make sure our trim is set. It is, and we will get going. First looking for 80. Make sure my first officer's awake. And there's 80, looking for 121. Give you a better look at it here. Rotate at 3 degrees a second, more or less, up to that bar, but actually, let's take that off, bring our gear up, and start our maneuver. So we're going to get ourselves into a bit more than a standard rate turn, and we are going to keep it pretty darn high. I see our speed is creeping down, so I'm just going to bring us down a little bit so we're no longer decelerating, and that's about the most I can do right there. And I'm just going to come around here to 104 degrees, and you'll see where that maneuver has left us. All right, there we are. We'll roll wings level here, and you'll see we are exactly parallel to the runway, and look at how little space it took to reverse course. So if you need to take off from someplace like Juneau, you've got terrain, a lot of those departures call for you to fly straight into a hold, or if you're visual and you've got the power, you can do a maneuver like that. It also helps because it gets you out of the pattern quickly or back into the pattern quickly, depending on which way you take it. So if you're at an uncontrolled airstrip, it can get you higher than most of the incoming traffic, quicker and out of the way. So as we go through this, and I'm just below my V climb here, let me just creep that up a little bit so that we're legal. We're not legal, at least we're moral. Spin our heading bug around. Pop us into IAS mode. And heading select. And never remember which bridge that is, whether it's the Dumbarton Bridge or the San Mateo. I think it's the San Mateo Bridge, but I really should know that. I do enough flying around here. All right. We're climbing pretty slowly, and the first thing that we are going to do in all this is diagnosis, and that consists of just 3 simple things. One is, which way is the sky? Identify that. Second, am I nose high or nose low? Identify that. Ascertain that. Third is, if I am not wings level, if I'm not upright and wings level, let's be accurate about that. If I'm not wings level, then what is the shortest distance to get back to either the horizon, if you're upright, or if you're inverted, to get back level with the horizon, non-inverted. If we were in IMC, we would look at this index right here. That is the sky pointer. It always points to the sky. We'd also note that just like outside, that's brown and this is blue, and that's blue and this is brown, and we're copacetic there. So let's do this. Since we are climbing here, take out the autopilot and take out our flight director. First unusual attitude we'll put ourselves in is nose high. as a result of a zealous too steep climb. Now this is unusual attitude recovery. This is not necessarily stall recovery. As a matter of fact, with any luck, it will be done before you have to recover from a stall. So let's just eliminate the possibility of a stall or an immediate stall altogether here at the top of this climb. So what we'll do is we'll put ourselves into a shallow dive, and then we will go into, in essence, a far too nose-high condition. And it will be a stall if we don't do something about it. So build up a little airspeed here. Not going to take much. First thing I'll do is, okay, our bleeds are on normal, that's fine. It's just alerting because of where our props are. Okay, so we will now commence to getting ourselves unusually nose high. Now this is going to be easy in a way. I'm just going to let the speed come down here. Okay, there we are. Now, if you look outside, you will see that we are really nose high. And one other thing I'm going to check. Our gear did not come up. Well, it doesn't. It's immaterial here, but I've been having keyboard trouble. I've been hitting keys and gear's not coming up. But the real problem is that I was sitting here yammering instead of doing my job, so doesn't really matter, but just for hygiene's sake. Okay, so first thing we want to do is we want to identify which way is the sky. Well, we're pointing right at it, but in fact we don't have a horizon, so that could sometimes be misleading. So we will simply look here, and the sky pointer is pointing this way. Where are we with respect to the horizon? Well, can't see the horizon, so we have to substitute these lines for the horizon, and know the horizon's down here somewhere. So we are wings level. We do not have to turn to get to the horizon, and we are significantly nose high, and the sky is above us. So we're going to let the speed bleed off, come off the power, and in a regular plane, you could fight off this stall by pushing slightly and putting on the power, and usually the lesson is to put on the power first, but I'm going to show you why that isn't necessarily the greatest thing in the world, and real-world dash pilots should weigh in on this because it's always a combination of both, but the training at American on their jets and their T-tailed planes to an absolute single one is to unload the wings first. In other words, to push first, get your G-load down, and here's why that's important. The G-forces are what the wing is fighting against. That's what the lift is overcoming. So if you get the G-load down, that will bring the nose down. It will maintain your controllability, and things will take care of themselves that way. So anyway, what we want to do is, first I'll show you the wrong way to do this, or the way that seems in my experience so far to be not especially good. So let me just bring our angle of attack down very slightly and roll off the power at least a little bit, because we're climbing so steeply here. It's not going to matter what kind of power we have, and I want to actually get into more of a boundary condition. So we will push already, and now we'll bring the power off. All right. Now you see I've stalled it already. Let me get us back into a better situation here. All right. What we will do is we will climb up again here. Basically, I just recovered from a stall instead of recovering from an unusual attitude per se. So what we'll do is we'll bring the power down here, and we will bring the angle of attack up again. And we will stop it right there. Okay. Now, when I let this thing come unpaused, I will jam the power back on, but I will maintain that pitch. Or I'll maintain my pitch input, and you'll see what happens to the pitch. But here's a hint. You've got on these wings very powerful engines, and they are going to push our angle of attack up. So at the very moment I'm trying to get the nose down, these will be producing a levering, rotating motion this way, because these wings are going to want to go this way, and they're attached to the rest of the plane, and you've got two gigantic engines there just giving them a big shove, and it is not in the nose where the weight can pull us down. It is a plane with momentum, and what's going to happen is it's going to want to keep flying this way, because that's our flight path vector. And remember, here's our flight path vector, and here's our angle of attack, so the difference between the two is our alpha, and it is going to want to lever this thing out from under us in a way, and it's going to force the nose up even higher. And that is going to push us actually by angle of attack into a stall. So here we go. Forward with the power levers, and I can't get the nose down. All right. Luckily, we're just in stick shaker and not stall territory. So that is why you don't want to initially use the power. At least in my experience in this sim, the real dash may be different. And I'd love to hear from a real dash pilot. We're just over Moffett Field here on the outskirts of San Jose. Just turn around back towards KSFO. And now we will recover from it a different way. The advice is, if you find yourself nose up, to first unload the wings, bring the nose down, and then feed in power. The other piece of advice is less intuitive, especially if you're raised, whether in the real or the simulated world, to be deeply concerned about spins. Now, we're not using the rudder here, but what we're going to do is we're going to get ourselves excessively nose up again. Let me just stop it right here. And the training is not just to push, but to take the quickest route if your angle of attack is too steep to get the nose down. And you look outside and picture this. Again, we've got a flight path vector and we've got momentum. And when we get into that climb, in essence, when we push, we're going to be in a big, long, parabolic arc. So we are going to arc from, say, down here, up, over the top, over the top, over the top, get our nose down. That is a long way to do it if we're bleeding off speed. If we're going very fast right here when we start shooting up, we will have enough energy to carry us over the top and back down into the promised land. If we are not going fast enough, we will go up, 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 up. We will not have enough energy to carry us up and over, and we will stall, and then we'll be certainly nose down. And if we were nose down at this altitude, it wouldn't really matter, but if we were a little bit closer to the ground, we would be tattooed, and that other thing that rhymes with tattooed with one syllable starting with a screw. So the way out of that is, instead of just pushing, we are going to push, and once we push a little bit, we will have unloaded the wings. They will still have aileron effectiveness, even though we're going very slowly. And then we will roll the plane. In essence, we will shortcut through this parabola. We'll go up, 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 and roll out of it here. Now, because we're using the ailerons, and we are not primarily using the rudder, and because the wings are unloaded and they are producing lift, we're not going to have the phenomenon of the left wing stalling, the right wing flying, and us spinning. Instead, we will simply get our nose down. There's another little refinement to this, And we'll get to that later, and that's when we're in extreme bank angles. We will have to use the rudder as our elevator because we're going to be sideways with respect to the ground, and you'll see why in a second. But anyway, let's get ourselves up into an unusual attitude again. So, up, 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 up we go. And first thing we do is we're going to push, and then we are going to roll. And down will come the nose, and we will then... Now you notice we're well below the stick shaker speed, but you notice I still have full aileron authority. Did you see that? We didn't go into a snap roll, we didn't go into a spin. We just carried on, even though we were going a good 20 knots below what you would think is our stall speed. But there is no stall speed. There is only untenable angles of attack combined with untenable G-loads. So let's try that one more time. Up we go. Again, staying off the power until a little bit later in the game. Now we push. Now watch. We push and we roll. We're going 103 miles an hour and we're fine. And again, we're riding this down on stick shaker, but you can see I can still roll. It's just loading the airport there. All right, so that's one down. Now, nose low. That is a different problem. Nose low, the procedure is relatively simple. When you're going straight nose low and you find yourself like this, you say, okay, where is the sky? The sky is that way, or the sky pointer's that way. We nose up or we nose down. We're clearly nose down. What is the shortest distance to get back to wings level or to roll to the sky pointer? And that is neither way because we're level. So the cure for this one is
caution, terrain.
Come off the power, judiciously raise the nose, don't go into a zoom climb, and let the speed bleed off. All right, let's try another one. Let us get
bank angle, bank angle, bank angle.
Like that.
Caution, terrain.
Now, this could be where our simulation fails us. I'm not sure. But let's do the diagnosis. Well, first of all, let's just look at it. That's not good. All right, diagnosis. Sky is that way. We are nose down. And the shortest distance to rotate back so the sky is above us and our lift vector is pointing up is to roll to the right. Now, roll to the right because in order to get around from here to there going to the left would take us many, many degrees further around than we have. So there is another aspect to this procedure. Again, we want to unload the wings because at this point our danger is too much G's. We can't pull out of this the way you could in a fighter plane by simply unbanking very slightly, cranking in a ton of power, and pulling. And even in a fighter, you have physical limits of the human body, so you can't just all of a sudden put yourself in maneuver to save your carcass by pulling 12 G's because you'll black out and you'll die anyway, or you'll give yourself a stroke. So what we are going to do is we are going to unload the wings by pushing ever so slightly, and then we are going to come off the power because we are nose down, And bear in mind, we are nose down, even though with respect to the airplane itself, we're nose up. So this is just to what direction is the flight path vector, and it is going that way. So we will come off the power, and we will unload the wing. We will roll to the right. And the other little item is, and it'll come more into play in our next maneuver, is that we are going to go through 90 degrees with respect to our lift vector, which means that, if you can see right here, the elevator will turn into a rudder in essence, and the rudder will be an elevator. So we will put in coordinated rudder with the direction we're rolling to keep the nose from either rising or sinking too much. So let's see how our simulation works, by the way. So out we come, push, roll off the power. And not quite good enough because we oversped the aircraft by a lot. Let's try that again. Now, bear in mind I might have put the plane into an unrecoverable attitude, so let's just see. In other words, I might have paused it at the point where it was beyond saving, or at least beyond saving without wrecking something. So let's try it again. A little slower this time. Roll us over.
Bank angle.
And
Bank angle.
Stop. All right. So again, we're going to push slightly. We're going to roll to the right, and we're going to feed in enough right rudder to keep the nose from getting too high or too low. So if we put in left rudder, it would drag our nose down. If we put in just enough right rudder, it'll essentially keep us level with respect to the horizon. So here we go.
Bank angle.
Push,
Bank angle.
roll,
Bank angle. Caution. Terrain. Caution. Terrain.
coordinated rudder. Let me show you the importance of the rudder, by the way, just by putting us into a steep bank here. Now, I'm going to move the nose up and down
Bank angle.
as we go around
Bank
this
angle.
very steep turn
Bank angle.
with the rudder.
Bank angle.
Right rudder, pushing it up.
Bank angle.
Left
Bank
rudder,
angle.
pushing it down.
Bank angle.
Right rudder, pushing it up.
Bank angle. Bank angle. Bank angle. Bank angle. Bank
And
angle.
left rudder, bringing it
Bank
down.
angle.
And we'll come out of it. Now, if you're inverted, the exact same thing applies, only you're certainly going to rotate through, you're certainly going to roll through those 90-degree points, so you will absolutely have to use the rudder. So let's try that. I'm not sure whether we can go inverted in this airplane, but again, we cannot, even if we could get into that situation, we cannot fly for a long time inverted because we do not have the elevator authority to do that. So let's just buy ourselves a little bit of altitude here. And the procedure is going to be exactly the same. We will push and unload the wings, roll in one direction or the other. It's not going to matter because we're going to be inverted exactly, precisely, I hope. And then use rudder as we come through the 90 degrees to keep us from sinking too much and to get the nose where we want it, which is ever so slightly down, and we want to end the maneuver ever so slightly nose down so we don't run into problems like a secondary stall. Or if we're going drastically too fast, we want to be climbing, but we don't want to put ourselves into a kind of zoom climb that will, again, risk a second upset maneuver coming out of it. So let's first get our rudder trimmed up a little bit. Now, here's the other gotcha. It's really very simple. The other gotcha is that when you get in these unusual attitudes, the reason why we're using gross controls like rolling out of too steep a climb is simply because the airplane is going to be trimmed for a condition that may not give you enough travel to get out of it just by pushing or pulling. So if we can fall out of it and we can use a relatively non-trimmed surface, which is the rudder, if we need to, or the ailerons to roll out of it, we're going to be in much better shape than if we end up trying to stay level in inverted flight or get our nose down quickly when the airplane is trimmed to want to fight us. So, all right, here's going to be as we sort of fly out over the East Bay now. We're going to try and get this beast inverted. I'm not even sure if it will fly in a simulated fashion inverted, but I've climbed us up to plenty of altitude. I'm going to put us in a little bit of a dive. The other reason to use the rudder to maintain control in a large plane like this is that it doesn't roll the way a fighter plane or an aerobatic plane will. It just doesn't roll fast enough to get you out of it without losing altitude. So you have to use the rudder as top rudder, as it's called, to maintain as close to level flight as you can. So let me just see. Okay, that's about the maximum we can roll. Let us try to do, it's a maneuver called a snap roll, where you use opposite rudder and then you whip into, you say right rudder and then you release the right rudder and you whip into a left roll. It sort of uncorks the plane. Let's see if it'll do it in that case. So hard there, and that doesn't increase our roll rate at all. All right, so
Bank angle. Bank angle.
we are inverted,
Bank angle. Bank angle.
and we're losing altitude because we do not have
Terrain. Caution.
elevator authority. So first thing we check is, are we nose up or nose down? Well, it's interesting. Our nose is, of course, we are pointed at the ceiling, but we're actually nose down. The sky is up here. The shortest distance to roll doesn't really matter. So what we'll do is we will roll, continue our roll to the left, and so we will use probably a little bit of left rudder to keep our nose upright. The other thing is that we are oversped already. So we're going to push to unload the wings, which will reduce our descent as much as possible, and we're going to come off the power. And then we're going to roll and use rudder to adjust. And we're going to climb out of our overspeed. Now, I wish I could say that I did that, but what you just saw there was really an artifact of the simulation, that sort of snap roll back. There is no way on Earth a human being could have done a maneuver like that on purpose. And so I think what we may have run into is a limitation of the simulator. I'm not entirely sure it really knows how to simulate something like this. And I'm not sure if that's how the real airplane reacts. So, but let's try this, just to limit that snap rolly sort of tendency. Let's try that a little bit slower, so we're not going to be in an overspeed. We're at worst, we're going to be only outside one or two parameters instead of every single parameter the simulator has. So at least we didn't lose very much altitude. So we're at 12,500. We'll get ourselves inverted again, only we're going slower this time. We will push to unload very slightly, roll out of it, and then use rudder to keep the nose where we want it to be. So around we go.
Bank angle. Bank angle. Bank angle. Bank angle.
And I'm already
Caution.
almost
Terrain.
oversped.
Caution.
So
Terrain.
off the power. I've pushed all I can. So we're going to roll out of it and use a little bit of left rudder, see?
Pull up.
Well, too fast.
Pull up.
And I'm out of trim. Let's see if we have enough altitude.
Pull up.
All right, barely.
Pull up.
All right. So we've discovered the limitations of of our simulation and probably of our technique too. Let's wait till it stops beeping at us here. Okay. And that was a net loss of 12,000 feet and a net gain of about 6. So 18,000 feet on both sides of it. So if that happened at an approach altitude or a pattern altitude, we would not be telling the story. So not sure in the real dash what the aerodynamics are in that regime. I know it hasn't been flight tested that way, and I'm not sure whether it can be adequately simulated that way, but it's safe to say it's better not to get into that at all. Now, a couple quick final notes before we head back in. Let me just see where we are. Where are we? Okay, I see where we are. Seem to have gotten ourselves out over the East Bay. There's the ocean. Actually, we're right not far from San Quentin. So we'll just come on back into San Francisco. But there is one more thing you need to be aware of in terms of upset recovery, and that is just the plain old upset. Colgan 3407 was a dash with 50 some odd people on board. The first officer's name escapes me, but the pilot flying was a Captain Marvin Renslow, and they had been cleared for the approach into Buffalo, and they had just done an automated descent, and they were flying on autopilot. And we're talking to ATC. We're not observing a sterile cockpit. We're bitching about, I think one of them had a cold and they were fatigued. And what happened was this, as you'll see in a minute. Let's pop us into altitude hold as the terrain here loads. And get us into heading select mode, just get us on a heading back towards the airport. We'll do a nice circling approach to land. You'll like this anyway. We'll do a little bit of energy management. All right, altitude hold, drop in the autopilot. So here's what happened. Just get ourselves up to decent speed. All right, let's wait till it levels us out. So they were making their way in on autopilot, and they had reduced their power to descend, and the autopilot was still on, and they reduced their power and they slowed, and you keep your eye right on that. Take my feet off of the pedals, take my hands off the control, and they were getting themselves into a low energy state, which would have been appropriate again if their G-forces had been minimal and their alpha had been low. But as they rolled off the power, remember the dash does not have an autopilot. Their alpha increased, their energy decreased. and more and more and more and more. The nose climbed as they were going about their business, looking at plates, talking on the radio. And that's what happened. And this is where Captain Renslow found himself and 50 some odd others on a dash on the way into Buffalo on an icy night. What happened to him and all those people was totally, completely avoidable. And you got your first clue right there. You heard that tone sounding. That was the autopilot going off, in addition to the stick shaker. That's the best sign ever that something is terribly, terribly wrong and it needs your attention in the dash, is that your autopilot disconnects. And in many planes, it does the same thing when you get into unusual attitudes. All Captain Renslow had to do was this. Push. Unload the wings and get down to a suitable alpha. But already the very act of pushing was unloading the G-forces from the wings. So the very act of pushing was making some of that lift they were gaining unnecessary, even as they were doing it. That's all that had to be done. Now, instead, let's go back on autopilot here. Instead, what Captain Renslow did was this. He pulled, and over they went. So let's push and use some rudder and get ourselves back. All right. So really, first of all, the autopilot should be telling you something. Second of all, if you do get yourself in that situation, then the autopilot is still on. By all means, shut it off. Because it's not going to do you any good to fix the problems that we went through by turning this knob or this knob or this knob or that knob or anything. What's gone wrong demands your immediate attention, and either you won't give it your immediate attention when you're futzing around with the autopilot, or you'll have the autopilot in and you will be fighting it. So you don't want to do that either. So let's get configured for a landing in SFO, and we are going to fly a very oddball little approach which is not on the charts. They do have a circling approach that goes from the 2/8s around to the 1s, but we're going to come around this way and come directly down the hill to the 1s, just because I need a little bit of proficiency in my energy management, and it's just plain fun to do. So we're going to stay at an altitude that will get us over these hills over here, and we're going to come charging down those hills. Now, the simple way to do it would be to jam your props full forward to 1020 and put in 35 degrees of flaps, but we're going to make it a little bit harder on ourselves in terms of energy management, and we are going to do it at props 850 and flaps 15. And that's mainly because I just like to. I like the approach profile more, I guess. I've got a case of jet envy and it flies more like a jet that way, but whatever the reason, we'll bring our props down to 850. Makes it a little bit harder, too. We'll hit this little button here, move the levers forward, and we're configured. So there's our runway. We're more or less on a kind of reverse Polish downwind leg, I guess you'd call it. Except I like Polish people too much to call it that. growing up in Pittsburgh, I really, honest to God, thought that everybody was named Kowalski. The local churches, 3 or 4 times a year, instead of having bake sales, they would have pierogi sales, where the church ladies would make up potato and onion and sausage pierogies. Good stuff. Alright, so here's our energy management challenge. We are going to get ourselves down by hook or by crook down that hillside. That, by the way, is Half Moon Bay Airport, and that is supposed to be a really slick place to fly, and I think Orbix is going to be making scenery for it at some point. So let's get ourselves down below 200. Off comes the power. Take our battered and beaten airplane back into the hangar. I'm still not trading any altitude right now. I'm just going to hold ourselves nose level and let the speed come off. Get our first notch of flaps out early. And we'll land on one left. Start coming around. In reality, unless you're flying a very light plane, you probably would not fly this approach, but there's nothing stopping the mighty dash. Let the nose start coming down. Already bled off a significant amount of speed. Keep our eye on the field. Fly a sort of quasi-Hungarian base leg. I don't know why I'm onto the Balkans here now. Fly a good old American base leg. Can make fun of my own Polish ancestors on my own time, not on yours. Alright, out comes the gear. We're going to establish a fairly hefty rate of descent. Out can come the next 2 notches of flaps. And let's see if we can do this without pulling our props back. So I'm going to do a little S-turn. See how I can get uncoordinated and use the rudder to point us at the ground? I'm not going to really do that because it's not the way it's done. But the way we can add a little more drag is we can put ourselves into a slip. So I'm going to be full right rudder. I mean full left rudder, I'm sorry. And right on the ailerons, and that is going to get us a load of drag. A little too much speed. Right on the hairy edge of our flap retraction speed. So let's try another energy losing maneuver. Do a little 360 here. Try and keep our eye on a landmark here. Now the challenge we've got is we've got terrain to our right, and we could, yeah, I think we're going to be sinking too quickly to clear the terrain. Yep, we will. No, we won't. This is a stupid thing to do. Feed in a little more power. We're right at our minimum maneuvering speed. Nope, we'll make it. Okay. Keeping my eye out the window and one eye on the airspeed indicator. I already know what our angle of attack is, and I know the G's we're pulling, which are considerable, but now we've got the Mighty Dash's engines working for us instead of against us. The only problem is I can't quite see the runway. Alright, there we are. down can come the power. I am not going to give up on this approach.
Sink rate.
I'm
Sink
being stupid and stubborn.
Sink rate.
But now we're low speed and we've established a
Sink
nice
rate.
healthy sink. And we're in a slip, full right rudder, and left aileron. I'm going
Sink
to
rate.
ease out the right rudder to line up our nose. There we are.
Sink rate.
This is not orthodox. It is not
Sink
recommended.
rate.
Now, because we're sinking like a stone, in
Sink
a
rate.
second I'm going to start feeding back in the power. And because the one thing you do not want to do in a dash is get into a low energy state. Okay, power can come back in. Keeping our angle of attack fairly low. Keeping our trim fairly constant. We're going to come up just a hair. There we go. More power. Keep those pappies nice and sweet and meaty. Look at that.
100.
Do a little jig here. Line ourselves up.
50. 40. 30. 20.
Feed in a little power.
10.
And look out, Loretta. We're home. And this is Flightbeam's wonderful KSFO HD, complete with real grass and real stuff. Simply amazing looking, and not too frame rate hostile either. And that was unusual attitude recovery again, because I'm not the expert in this. Please, any real world dash pilots, weigh in. Let me know what I'm doing wrong. I'll fix it. We'll do a revised video and get some good information out there. In the meantime, having had a little bit of fun in the skies here and living to tell the tale, see you next time.